Hi, this is the online lecture for Chapter 15, Serious Learning Games, where rules rule. So the next couple chapters are really about how you can use games in your e-learning to improve interaction and actual learning. So I have a few lines that I thought were important to point out. So as you read through this chapter, these are some of the points that I thought were particularly important. So it says, the very idea of a game seems attractive and energizing. As people engage in games voluntarily, quite the opposite of how they react to a dreary classroom training or dreadful e-learning. But games can also consume a lot of learners' time. So here's the question. Can they really accomplish serious instructional goals? So can you make games so that they really do provide instructional and learning, right? So this chapter is about some of the fundamental components of successful games. And it's going to show that really games don't have to be complex or expensive in order to appeal to a player. So the implication is that, games are fun. People want to do them voluntarily. They can't be getting anything out of it. And learning is serious and hard, and it's work, and it isn't meant to be fun. But so the implication is that distinguishing factor between learning and play is that while play is easy and fun, learning isn't either of these things. And I disagree with the fact that games can always be fun. Really, learning a complex game does take energy and practice and, learning the rules and how to play and what techniques are going to give you the best strategy for winning. So learning games present great relief from boring e-learning and offer an excellent learning platform, producing significant performance enhancement. We need to get leaders on board on just how smart it is to up the ante for investment in some fun, serious learning games, SLGs. Learning is integral to games, even the most basic games. You have to learn the rules in order to play it. But it seems quite challenging to inject instructional events into games without taking the fun out of it. Good e-learning is fun. That is what the author is stating. And bad e-learning is not fun. So I think we've seen that theme throughout the whole book. And he does go through quite a bit of content. So for this whole idea of serious learning games, right? He talks about some sources confuse gamification with serious learning games, or SLGs. They talk about the importance of scoring, power-ups, sound effects, blah, blah, blah. Those are the things that are common in games, but they, and they add interest. They are amusing. They are entertaining, but they're not necessary or fundamental to the success of having a game in e-learning, right? You can create great games, learning and otherwise, without having all those bells and whistles. And then conversely, opposite, you could have all those pretty bells and whistles and fun things happening without really creating an effective learning game. So what makes something a good game? So he talks about how he went to this Eric Zimmerman's talk on learning. So he says, what this Eric asked the crowd, what makes a good game? And here are the things that they answered. And it's like, okay, yeah, nice, but no, not essential. So bottom line, he revealed what Eric Zimmerman, what makes a good game? Good rules. Good rules. Come to understand and greatly appreciate good rules equals a good game. Poor rules is a poor game. And that's true in any kind of game. You ever play a game, you learn, you're like, what? And then you look up in the instructions and it's like there's nothing. Well, do I do this or do I do that? Because you have no idea, right? So he does a whole thing with tic-tac-toe, right? So that's a pretty simple game. But there are rules to it, right? There are rules to tic-tac-toe. Rules provide a critical element of context for where the game is played and the strategies to win, right? Both rules and strategies have to be learned so that game designers and instructional designers share a common interest in learning. Instructional designers have the additional need for learned skills to be transferable outside of the game into the real world, right? You're not just learning it to play this game. You're learning the rules. You're playing this game in order to translate it into some meaningful performance enhancement. The learning necessary to play should not be a distraction to the fun of playing. As instructional designers, we should share this interest with game designers, although we have complementary interests in making sure the fun isn't a distraction, right? So game designers don't really care about that part of it, right? So we do have some overlap in between instructional designer and game designers. So for understanding games more deeply, it's useful to divide game rules into two groups: rules of play and outcome rules. So rules of play is what the player must, can, and cannot do. Outcome rules is how the game responds to players' actions. So such stipulations can be written as production rules, that is, a specific if-then statement, and often are in game design and development, especially in the programming of it. So here's an example of rules of play and outcome rules. So rules of play: if it's player one's turn, then player one must play one and only one X in an empty cell. If it's player two's turn, the player must place one and only one O marker in an empty cell. Outcome rules: if a player one has, so here's the rules of place and here's the outcome rules. If player one has just placed a marker, it becomes player's two turns. If player two has placed, it becomes player one's. If a player has placed 3 markers in a row, horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, then that player wins and the game is over. So that's an outcome rule, right? Tic-tac-toe, simple game. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things here listed. The successful player learns strategies, when and how to take specific actions, and applies them effectively. This is where we see primary opportunity to use games for serious instructional purposes. So these two sentences are really important. A successful player learns strategies, when and how to take action, and applies them effectively. Right? So this is where we turn from just game design into an instructional process. Strategies are actions based on learning, recognition, recall, and reasoning. So then the chapter goes on to talk about the anatomy of game strategy, and he looks at, tic-tac-toe. We all know how to play it, and then the strategies for tic-tac-toe. So if it's your first play and you take a corner cell, the second player will have the fewest winning options. So that's not a rule. That's a strategy that you learn as you play the game. If the first player initially takes a corner cell and the second player does not take the center, the first player will win by choosing another corner, right? So those are things, once again, you the strategy you learn when you continue to play it. If the first player takes a corner cell, then the second player should take the center square to avoid losing per number 2. If one player puts 2 markers in a row, then the other player should fill the third one, right? Or you're going to lose. So these are the strategies for winning a game of tic-tac-toe. Understanding the essential role rules played in games provides the basic for SLGs. So as we develop new games or adapt one that we already have to use instructionally, rules and strategies that build on the rules are prime design focus, right? So in the next chapter, we're going to look, there's a lot of examples. But he goes through here in some possible examples. So once instructional content is formatted in a way back here, then design objectives, the design objective is to see how much you can take the content and make it as part of the game's outcome rules. Ideally, all instructional content rules would overlap on the outcome rules and or the rules of play, right? So rules of play, outcome rules, we really want this instructional content to be not necessarily a subset, but aligned with the outcome rules. Okay, so that's just an introduction. The next movie we're going to talk about some examples. And, you're not going to do this stuff immediately, but you want to try and think about some of these techniques as you start to build your portfolio of work that you've created. All right, thank you.